بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قال موسى لفتاه لا أبرح حتى أبلغ مجمع البحرين أو أمضي حقبة رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم ثبتنا عند الموت بلا إله إلا الله اللهم اجعلنا من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين ثم أما بعد. Once again everybody, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What I'm going to do today, inshallah, is a little bit unique. I'm going to be going through some of my notes that are also done in collaboration with a student of mine, mashallah, a brilliant student, Sharif Rundawa, who studies Near Eastern traditions and their relationship with the Islamic tradition. So a lot of times the stories that are mentioned in the Quran, we're familiar with the stories as they are in the Quran, but are there other cultures, other traditions that have similar stories and parallels? And this is important to understand, especially when we're teaching Islam in the West, because the point of view that people have that study Islam, not non-Muslims that study Islam, is very different from our point of view, right? I don't agree with their point of view, but I have to understand their point of view. So here's their point of view. Their point of view obviously is that the Quran is not the book of Allah. Let's start with that. That is not their point of view. Their point of view is that the Quran is a mix of different kinds of folklore and traditions and stories, and that the Prophet ﷺ, of course to them he's not a prophet, is just a very creative person, right? Who's taking bits and pieces from all these different traditions and stories and meshing them together, right? So one of the most interesting peculiarities in Western studies into the Quran is actually the story of Musa and Khidr. The story, of course, Khidr is not mentioned by name in the Quran, is mentioned in the Hadith by the Prophet ﷺ. But the story itself and the journey and what occurs in the journey, all of this is very fascinating to them, because in Jewish tradition, of course, the Jewish tradition has a lot more on Musa than the Quran does, right? There are four out of the 5 books of the Old Testament are dedicated just to Moses, right? But they have nothing of this. There is no mention of any journey, any person named Khidr, or anywhere remotely that close. So what that makes them say is, well, this must be a confusion of the Muslims, of the early creative writers of the Quran, etc., etc. That's how they kind of mesh it together. And what they say is this actually has to do with the story of Gilgamesh and some other previous legends, in which there is a fish that goes off into the sea. So they'll see parallels that have been mentioned in other folklore somewhere, and say, since there's a parallel, this must have been borrowed from that other legend or that other story, right? And that's the formula. And it sounds very convincing to somebody who, it's actually not, first of all, it's not convincing. All it is speculation at the end of the day. Speculation that, look, I found another story in a completely different book somewhere, a mythical text somewhere, that has similar elements to the story that's in the Quran. That must mean that the story in the Quran was inspired from over there, okay? Our take on this, of course, begins with the fact that we're not looking to prove that the Quran is the word of Allah. The word of Allah is in and of itself mubin, in and of itself bayan. It's actually self-evident to us, right? And my study in the Quran, your study in the Quran as believers, begins with the assumption that this is the perfect word of Allah and it's the absolute truth. That's what it begins with. So even though it's peculiar that these parallels may be found, the only way we think about it actually is that Allah Azza wa Jal speaks absolute truth. And He, like He said in the beginning of the story, everything okay? Like He says in the beginning of the story, even when He was telling the story of the people of the cave, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ نَبَأَهُمْ بِالْحَقِّ إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ وَزِدْنَاهُمْ هُدًى. We're going to tell you the story accurately. Allah says He's going to tell it accurately and purposefully. Haqq also means purposefully, okay? And also haqq means He's the only one who has the right to tell the story accurately and purposefully. Now that He's established that precedent, every other story He's going to tell, it's as though He's the only one who has the right to tell it. As if to say others don't really know what happened. Nobody else really knows what happened. Only Allah Azza wa Jalla does. Which is a unique feature of this surah, because all of the stories mentioned in this surah have an atmosphere, an air of ambiguity. You don't really know everything, right? And it reinforces the idea that only Allah truly knows everything. And you're going to have to relegate that trust before Allah. But what I'm going to do today, inshallah, is share some things with you from my notes about how this story is paralleled with other stories in the same surah, and how themes are being built, how some of the themes are being built. So even though inshallah we'll do one more run of the story, later on. I'm just going to run through these dry notes, inshallah. So the story obviously centers around Musa alayhi salam. There are similar elements found in Christian literature from Alexander Romance and other Near Eastern lore, but it is completely new from them. So some people's theory is that the Quran takes bits and pieces from these other places and then makes a new story altogether. By the way, this happens with Musa alayhi salam in particular several times in the Quran. So Musa alayhi salam in Surah Al-Qasas, Allah talks about when Fir'aun was making fun of him, he called his general Haman and he said, build me a tower. Build me, لَعَلِّي أَبْلُغُ الْأَسْبَابِ أَسْبَابَ السَّمَاوَاتِ. So, كَيْ أَطَّلِعَ إِلَهِ Musa. I want to reach the God of Moses. Because the idea was, well, Musa went to a mountain and spoke to a flame, and through the flame he spoke to God. So why don't you build me a fire and a tower, and I'll make my own mountain, and I'll go up there and talk to God myself. I don't need to go to Musa's mountain, I can make my own. I have that kind of clout. Ironically, the pyramids are also shaped like mountains, right? But anyway, so he was mocking. Of course, this isn't found in Jewish literature. This claim that the Pharaoh said, build me a tower, is not found in Jewish literature, except it's found in a completely different story in the book of Xerxes, Esther actually, a king named Xerxes. The legend of the story is called the Tower of Babel. You may have heard the term. The Tower of Babylon or the Tower of Babel, right? And that's where the king says, build me a tower, I want to go speak to God. So then they claim, well, obviously this man, meaning Muhammad, we say sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they don't confuse the two stories together, jumble them together. And that's how these kinds of claims are made. And this is a very standard approach to studying Islam in the West. Okay, I personally am not shaken by it at all. I find it funny because Allah tells the stories accurately, and obviously He established that there are things that we're never going to know, and only Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to know. So where are these parting of the seas, and who is this young man with Musa? Yusha, some say, right, alayhi salam, that they're both prophets, and then they meet khidr, which comes in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But anyway, one of the first interesting thing that sticks out is إِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِفَتَاهُ, when Musa alayhi salam said to his young man, to his young lad. And this is not the first time fitya or youth is coming up in the surah. Where did it come up before? So you have in the beginning young people that have no mentor, they just have each other. And by contrast, now you have young people that are on a quest, or a young person who has a mentor, who has someone guiding him, and he's taking instructions from, right? So it's actually pretty interesting that both of those scenarios are highlighted. You'll notice also a parallel in that in the first case, young people are fleeing. They're fleeing from something. And in this case, these two are running towards something. They're not getting away from something, they're heading towards something. Anyhow, لا أبرح حتى أبلغ مجمع البحرين أو أمضي حقبة. I will continue, I won't stop until I reach مجمع البحرين, the meeting place of the two seas, or I spend ages doing so, right? So he's very committed to reaching this place. This is interesting because there is no mention of the words insha'Allah. And we've already established very recently in the surah, لا تقولن لشيء إني فاعل ذلك غدا إلا أن يشاء الله, right? So does he reach this place? Yeah. Does he pass the place? Yeah. So, and then later on, he actually recognizes it. So every time he speaks, he says, ستجدني إن شاء الله صابرا. So inshallah actually then comes back. And of course, you'll also notice that before Allah mentioned, when the ayah of inshallah came, Allah said, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيت. Mention your Rabb when you forget. And you'll find in this story, نَسِيَ حُوتَهُمَا. They forgot the fish. فَإِنِّي نَسِيتُ الْحُوتِ. I forgot the fish. And they both forgot their fish. So forgetting and then being reminded later on, right? That's actually something. And then of course, even as the story progresses, the instruction was one instruction. Don't ask me anything. What does Musa alayhi salam keep doing? Forgetting. لا تؤاخذني بما نسيت. Don't hold me to account for what I forgot. So forgetting and remembering, and inshallah, a theme already established in the surah now recurs and is reinforced in a completely fresh light, right? The word al-Bahrain could be a reference to Dhulmun, which is modern Bahrain actually. It's possible that it's a reference to that. In Mesopotamian tradition, especially in the story of Gilgamesh, which is whatever altered story there is, it actually refers to the place that is actually literally called Al-Bahrain nowadays. Now, فلما بلغ no, I'm missing it. لا أبرح حتى أبلغ مجمع البحرين أو أمضي حقبة فلما بلغ نسي حوتهما بينما نسي حوتهما فاتخذ سبيله في البحر سربا. The word بلغ, which is to reach, interestingly creates an anchor to reach somewhere, because in the next story, which is the story of Dhul Qarnayn, you're going to find balagha again. So what Allah does in this story, not only are there parallels to previous stories by the words Allah chooses, fitya, fata, right? There's an anchor made. Dhikr and nisyan, there's an anchor made, something established with the previous story. But what also is going to happen with the next story is that Allah Azza wa Jalla will mention where Dhul Qarnayn reached, wherever he reached. And now again, reaching is being mentioned, right? Hut, that's a side note, but in the Alexander romance, Gilgamesh and all these other stories, the fish is very important. And whatever Arabic was translated, the word hut was used there too. Another interesting thing in this particular story is the word sabil. وَاتَّخَذَ سَبِيلَهُ فِي الْبَحْرِ عَجَبًا سَرَبًا, right? Sabil. And you'll find the word sabil make its way again in the story of Dhul Qarnayn. It's going to be mentioned again. So these anchors are important because they create a kind of a connection. Inshallah, when we do get to the story of Dhul Qarnayn, then we'll revisit where was sabil used in the story of Musa, and where's sabil being used in the story of Dhul Qarnayn, and what could possibly tie these two things together. Because by using these words, Allah literally ties things together. He connects words that are the same and builds those bonds in our mind, right? فَلَمَّا جَاوَزَ قَالَ لِفَتَاهُ آتِنَا غَدَاءَنَا. When they passed it, he said to his young lad, give us our food. We're exhausted from our journey. لَقَدْ لَقِينَا مِنْ سَفَرِنَا هَذَا نَصَبًا. Interesting parallel to the first story. Is there hunger and getting food in the first story also? Isn't there? The young people get hungry when they wake up, and then they say, and by the way, the miraculous thing happened to them, and they didn't realize it, and then they said, bring us food. And in this story, a miraculous thing has happened. They actually passed the place we were supposed to pass, and when they were passing it, a fish jumped out of the thing, and it did happen. And they didn't realize it, and then they got hungry later and asked for food. So there's actually a direct parallel between the story of the people in the cave and the story of Musa alayhi salam in that sense also. لَقَدْ لَقِينَا مِنْ سَفَرِنَا هَذَا نَصَبًا. Interestingly also, not only did the young people, when they actually pursued the food, is when the story moves forward. And here, it's when they go and back in pursuit of the food, which is the fish that ran off, that's when the story moves forward and everything unravels, things become clear. Also an interesting parallel, إِذْ أَوَى الْفِتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ. What did that mean? When the young people, in the story of Al-Kahf, the cave, the youth of the cave, when they took refuge into the cave. And here, أَوَيْنَا إِلَى الصَّخْرَةِ. They took refuge towards a boulder. So there's another parallel. They're taking refuge there and they're taking refuge here. One of the most interesting things here is وَاتَّخَذَ سَبِيلَهُ فِي الْبَحْرِ عَجَبًا. It took its path in the sea in a strange way. عَجَبًا. This is not the first time عَجَبًا is used in the surah. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, أَمْ حَسِبْتَ أَنَّ أَصْحَابَ الْكَهْفِ وَالرَّقِيمِ كَانُوا مِنْ آيَاتِنَا عَجَبًا. Allah does miracles for young people, and it's not something out of the ordinary for Him. Did you really think it's that strange? And now Allah Azza wa Jalla is showing, not only when people are fleeing persecution, like young people standing up for their faith, fleeing persecution, impossible odds, they don't know where to escape, Allah will miraculously aid them, and it's not a big deal for Allah. Now in a completely different context, not running away from something, running towards something. Now they were running away from persecution. What are Musa alayhi salam and his young assistant running towards? What are they journeying towards? Knowledge. And when you're running towards knowledge, the beautiful theme is, when you're running towards knowledge, then Allah will open miraculous doors for you. And it's not very strange for Allah to do. Amazing things will happen when you pursue that journey. So young people are described in these two very different circumstances. This young lad, in the beginning of the story, running away from bad things, and here running towards a good thing. And in both, miraculous things are happening for them. Subhanallah. So the word عَجَبًا makes another appearance. Then قَالَ ذَلِكَ مَا كُنَّا نَبْغِي فَارْتَدَّ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمَا قَصَصًا. That is what we were pursuing. And so they retraced their steps. They retraced their steps. And the word for they're retracing their previously left steps is athar. Athar. Is athar making its way the first time into the surah? No. فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ. Are you going to kill yourself in grief over the athar? Now it's amazing that on the one hand, Allah talked about people that believe Allah has a son. Right? And they say this, مَا لَهُمْ بِهِ مِنْ عِلْمٍ. They have no knowledge of this. So what they leave behind, they live a life that is based on something that is no knowledge. There's no knowledge. And so they leave steps behind. And now there are people who are learning. They're on their path to learning. They also leave steps behind. And sometimes as a student, you will make mistakes and you'll have to retrace your steps, which is amazing. When you're alive, you can still take back the steps you made. Once you're dead, the steps that people have taken, the ramifications of it can't be undone. But while you're still alive, you can actually retrace your steps. You can go back and undo the damage you may have done. There's still hope for you, right? So, but the Christians had, يُذْرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا. Those who have already said Allah has taken a son, they've established that precedent of shirk. What a tradition they've left behind them, all the ruin that's come in their wake. Are you going to kill yourself in grief over the destruction that's come as a result? That's on the one hand, it's too late. And on the other hand, you've got two people who realized they crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed, they went too far, and they cut to come back. So the word athar is actually playing it on that theme, subhanAllah, just by its recurrence. فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا. So beautiful. They both found us, one of our slaves, who we had given rahmah, a special rahmah from. If you go back to the first story, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ rahmah. Master, give us, especially on your behalf, give us some kind of special mercy and care. And now, almost in the same wording, آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا. We had given to him a rahmah that comes especially from us. What Allah is teaching us again is, Allah decides who He gives His rahmah to, it only comes from Him. If you have a good life, if you have knowledge, if you have the reputation, put this in perspective. I mentioned this in the khutbah I gave a couple of weeks ago, it was so awkward, man. I was giving a khutbah, I was about to give a khutbah, I went to this masjid for the first time in Toronto, and they decided to do like a full-on introduction of how honored they are that I'm there, and it was so awkward. It was so, Brother Nouman is extremely knowledgeable, I was like, oh God. I was just making istighfar that lightning doesn't strike, because this is a place where only Allah should be glorified. There are no needs for introductions. And so I decided, I changed my khutbah altogether, because it was so bad. I did it out of love. I acknowledge that, I'm not hating on them or whatever. They did it out of love. But I felt the need to remind myself and others. Musa alayhi salam is actually the most knowledgeable human being at the time. He is. And I told you before, when people asked him, Ayyun nas a'lam, well, who of the people are the most knowledgeable, or who knows more? Sometimes you have to put students in their place. He wasn't saying it out of arrogance, but when you're dealing with dumb students, then the teacher has to say, listen, I know more than you, shut up. There are times where you have to do that. Oh, are you the teacher now? You have to do that sometimes, when students are getting out of hand. And of course, the students are Banu Israel, so they kind of have a history of getting out of line a little bit with prophets. And they've been with him for a long time. And then they ask what question? Who's more knowledgeable? Oh my God, it's Musa alayhi salam. Why would you ask that idiotic question? Why would you ask that? These people are clearly obnoxious in the way they're asking that question. And Musa alayhi salam puts them in their place. That's not the point. The point is, Allah makes him travel to meet Khidr. And this person has not received Torah. This person, whoever he is, has not received the revelation that Musa alayhi salam has received. Allah has given him some knowledge. And clearly, from an Islamic perspective, the most inspirational figure in the Quran, most mentioned, most talked about, most revered, most repeated is who? Musa alayhi salam. And so to us, he is one of the biggest teachers in history. And now we're learning a story in which that teacher becomes a student, yes or no? So if Musa alayhi salam in the Quran is the great teacher, and now we're learning even he has a teacher, the amount of reverence we have for Musa alayhi salam is actually dwarfed by the amount of reverence we're supposed to have for someone who Allah considers even Musa's teacher. And so how should this amazing honor, the incredibly knowledgeable human being that the Kalimullah, Musa alayhi salam, should go learn from him. man, Musa alayhi salam has the opportunity to speak to Allah directly. And he should go learn from him, Allah says. But understand the status of the person he's about to go meet, right? And then once you understand that, figure how Allah describes him. Abdan min ibadina. That's the description in the Quran of Khidr alayhi salam. Some slave from among our slaves. That's it. Not even al-abd. Not even lam al-ta'rif, not even proper like the slave. He meant like the ultimate slave of Allah. No. Not even Abdullah in Idafa, which would mean the slave of Allah. No. Abdan, some slave. Oh, let me qualify that better for you. Min ibadina, from the other endless ocean of slaves that we have. What should knowledge do? It should humble. What should knowledge do? It should make you, the more knowledge you have, it should make you realize I am just a slave among other slaves. I have no ranking like that. And the greatest rank you can earn actually is, that's one of the most amazing things about the Quran. I find it absolutely fascinating. You know, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, his ascension to the heavens, is important because up until then, the highest a human being had reached is the top of a mountain to speak to God, which was who? Musa alayhi salam. But now Allah Azza wa Jalla has decided that a human being will travel the heavens and meet Allah in a place where even the angel Jibreel can't go. He's going to go there. Which means no human being has ever reached a higher ranking than our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No human being's ever reached that status. Both literally and figuratively, no one's been higher. You understand that? And when Allah speaks about that ascension, every time He speaks about it, the Prophet is called Nabi, Prophet. He's called Rasul. He's named by name, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's called Ahmad. He's called Muzammil. He's called Muddathir. The couple of times Allah mentions the ascension, you know what He calls him? Subhanalladhi asra bi abdihi. Fa'awha ila abdihi ma awha. What does He call him? A slave. The ultimate position of learning from Allah directly. From Allah directly. It's not even Allah sending something down to you. Now He calls you up to Him. And in that position, the highest honor you can earn is literally the lowest term a human being can ever use for himself, slave. When you go back now and rethink about the story of the people of the cave, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً. One of the biggest mercies a human being can have. You know, on the one hand, if they are on a path to escaping oppression, is protection. That's protection from outside enemies. But in this journey, in the journey of knowledge, the enemy is not outside. Where's the enemy? Inside. You still need rahmah from Allah. آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِّنْ عِنْدِنَا. The rahmah given to him is his humility. As a matter of fact, I shared with you what he said to Musa alayhi salam, right? And the last time, you've been taught what I don't know. I've been taught what you don't know. First thing he acknowledges what he doesn't know. And as a matter of fact, first he acknowledged what Musa alayhi salam knows. What he knows and what he doesn't know. This is a rahmah from Allah for someone who's learning to acknowledge that they don't know. To acknowledge that they're still on the path. To acknowledge that they might sometimes cross where they were supposed to go and they went the wrong way and then they have to retrace their steps. Right? This is important because you know when you learn, and by the way, Musa alayhi salam has an assistant next to him, a student next to him. How easy is it for a teacher to admit they're wrong? It's hard. Oh, yeah, that was wrong. That wasn't right. Wait, let me correct myself. It's hard. It's embarrassing. Then the shaitan comes and says, your student is going to think you don't know what you're talking about. You're not really that good of a teacher because you're supposed to know everything all the time. You know? And they say, yeah, well, maybe I did. And then instead of admitting that you're wrong, you say, well, you know, it's complicated. And you start, you know, doing a political speech about how there are circumstances in which this might be acceptable or stop, just admit you're wrong. I didn't know. You know what? Oops. Yep, that was wrong. Cool. I do this all the time with students. I not admit I'm wrong. I make them feel bad for pointing out my mistakes. You know, I'll write, I have to say like sky, and I mistype it as shy or something. And then someone's like, Dad, it says shy. and I'll retype it as sky and say, no, read carefully. The sky. Batameez. You know? As a joke, that's fine. But you know what? It's okay to admit your mistake. It doesn't reduce anything from you as a teacher. So that's a little bit about that, you know, that one, rahmatan min indina, how a new light has been shined on it. The rahmah of Allah from outside threats and the rahmah of Allah from the inside, the nafs inside of us that needs to be put into check. May Allah keep all of us in check. Then of course the key words, you know, when he says, قَالَ لَهُ مُوسَى هَلْ أَتَّبِعُكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُعَلِّمَنِي مِمَّا عُلِّمْتَ رُشْدًا. Could you teach me from what you've been taught in terms of uprightness? مِمَّا عُلِّمْتَ عِلْمًا رُشْدًا. Ilm and rushd have been tied together now. Knowledge and guidance have been tied together, which is an important distinction. Rushdan here, you can even say, is a kind of tamyiz. Particularly from all the knowledge that you have, knowledge that sets you in the right direction. Such a beautiful word, tying all of what we've learned in this surah together. Listen to this carefully. You can learn a lot of stuff, but you won't have direction. You can learn a bunch of stuff and you have no direction. You can have, you know, there are people who are nerdy and they have information about all kinds of things. All kinds of things. Sports, technologies, you know, fun facts, the states of all the the capitals of all the states, you know, all kinds of stuff, but no direction. By the way, this happens even inside Islamic studies. You can know all kinds of stuff. You could know like all the ikhtilafat of how to pronounce this word in the qira'ah of Hafs according to per narration. You can know it, and that's awesome knowledge. It's really cool, especially like at a party. But if we lose sight that all of that knowledge is supposed to lead us in a particular direction, and knowledge in and of itself is not a goal. Its goal is to better give you direction. Direction was your goal. Knowledge was just a means to get to that goal. Think of knowledge like a map. The purpose of a map is not for you to go in every street. The purpose of a map is just as much of which streets to avoid and which street to stick onto. And if you do take a wrong turn, at least you have a map, which means you can make a few turns and come back on track. You know, فَارْتَدَّ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمَا قَصَصًا. In the study of Quran for myself, I mean, Quran is supposed to be the book of direction. It's supposed to be the book that guides you in the right direction. In the study of Quran itself, I can get lost in technicalities and i'rab and nahu and sarf and the root analysis of a word or the 80 different opinions about this one ayah or whatever, and lose sight of the fact that I was actually studying this because I wanted direction in my life. That's what I was learning it for. Not so I can collect quotes and get all like ilmi on people. Because people like doing that. Like talibul ilm, I'm gonna go talibul ilm on you now. I'm gonna quote a bunch of stuff. And most of it I won't even translate, partially because I don't know what it means either. You know? Don't lose sight of direction. Don't lose sight of direction. So it's so beautiful that Musa alayhi salam adds that qualifier, rushdan. You know, it ties the previous stories together, especially the first one, the story of the people of the cave, because people lost sight of what's the point of this story. Let's just argue how many there were. Let's just argue how many years they lived. You know, you're missing the point. You're just missing the point. So don't miss the point. And by the way, that's the temptation here again, isn't it? Who is khidr? Is he really green? You know? Like, where is this place? Is it really Bahrain? I'm still going to Bahrain to learn now. No. That's just some side commentary. It's okay. Get back on track. Just get back on track and don't lose focus. Okay? قال إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا وكيف تصبر على ما لم تحط به خبرا. The theme of sabr is a special theme in this story. Sabr means what? Patience, perseverance, right? In this story, sabr is made dependent on the recognition that Allah knows the unseen. This is an important lesson. It's very succinctly said here. Sabr is dependent on how well you recognize that Allah owns the unseen. When do we become impatient? Things that happen, that we experience, that we can see, that we can feel, that we can touch. What gives us the strength to be patient through those experiences? There are other things happening that are in the unseen world that you can't see or feel or touch. For all the bad that you're experiencing, there's something good that's happening. The easiest example of that, that's so evident in the sunnah of our Messenger that I can give you, it's so beautiful, is when you visit somebody sick. They're in pain. They're experiencing pain. They're not able to do what they were once able to do. They're bedridden. They can't, some simple pleasures that like sitting up and eating they can't enjoy, right? Going out and taking a walk they can't do anymore. And you go to this person and the prophetic words are la ba's, tahur inshallah. No problem. Purifier inshallah. Wait, no problem? All I see is problems. No, in another world, in another reality, a reality you can't see, this is actually not a problem at all. In the grand scheme of things, this is nothing. And then on top of that, your body is actually contaminated. Your body is to be cleansed of an internal contaminant that is keeping it from being healthy. And health and purity go hand in hand. And the exact opposite words, no, this is a purifier. Yeah, it's purifying your sins, it's purifying some other mistakes, it's purifying trouble that if you were healthy you would have gotten yourself into. It's purifying things from your life that you did not want, you did not need. This is the idea of sabr. You missed a flight, you got on the airport and you got a security line was super long and you get to the gate and sorry, and they close the gate in front of you as they watch you running. Can I get on? No, the gate's closed. But you were making eye contact with me as you closed the gate. No, but it's closed. It's a policy. Once we close the gate, you can't get on. And then she gets a message on the walkie-talkie. There's a few seats over here. It's Jersey. So, but it's closed. And you're upset. How come they didn't let me on this flight? Oh God, this is so horrible. Etc., etc. Actually, maybe there was some evil for you on that flight. You don't know. You don't know if you landed early, something bad was going to happen to you on the way home. Some accident you avoided that now you were never even on that road because you came home 3 hours later the next morning. Something Allah planned, averted from you. We look at the scene and we lose our patience. The entire purpose of the story is to know that there's something. Allah always has a better plan in the background. You will experience things that agitate you, that you don't understand, that I don't understand. But we have to rely that Allah has something better planned for us. That's the lesson that's being taught. And so sabr is actually the lesson learned. That's why it keeps making its appearance again. And that's why, lahu ghaybu samawati wal ard. By the way, even before, about the unseen, Allah alone owns the unseen of the skies and the earth. Rajman bil ghayb came before, people making assumptions about the unseen, throwing stones in the unseen. Now, this was actually particularly important for the Sahaba because the Sahaba were going through a lot of trouble at the time. Like this is a Makki surah, they were being persecuted. Things did not look good. But Allah Azza wa Jal has something working in the background. Something's happening that they don't realize. Like I'll give you one more example of this even if it takes the rest of our time. One of the hardest examples to process if you don't recognize this is sometimes in the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ is criticized. Like abasa wa tawalla, the Prophet's criticized. He frowned, he turned away. Abasa, he bulged on the forehead and he turned away. Right? And how is this a good thing? How is a critique of the Prophet ﷺ a good thing? Or actually the story I just recently taught, the story of Aisha radiallahu anha, how she was slandered. How the most noble woman, this woman did more good. I want you to understand the pressure on this woman, this young woman. A fourth of the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ would not make their way to us if it's not for our mother Aisha. She has one of the most noble tasks, noble responsibilities ever given to a woman in history. And yet, and she is one of the most revered, respected, regarded figures in Islam. And yet, Allah put her through, I cannot imagine a more humiliating experience. To be in that profile as she is, and to be accused of cheating on her husband, and to be accused, and her husband being the messenger of Allah. And then if that's not bad enough, people from within her own family buying into it. People from within her own family. And this lasting over the course of a month. That experience, what she went through, is so horrible. It's so bad. And by the way, from the Shari'i perspective, The accusation made against an innocent woman is, that itself should be whipped. A person who makes such an accusation or even insinuates something like that, right? They should be whipped. And yet, how did the Quran describe it? He says, لا تحسبوه شرا لكم بل هو خير لكم. Don't imagine it to be something evil that happened for you. Rather, it's something good for you. خير لكم. How is that good? It's good in the unseen. But I can tell you some things we can't see now that couldn't have been seen then. Until the day of judgment, are there going to be innocent women that are slandered? Innocent people whose reputations are ruined by people's words, by people's casual comments and remarks? Yes, there are going to be people like that. And until the day of judgment, those people will receive their strength and will know that their honor has not been tarnished because of the words Allah gave to Aisha radiallahu anha. She had to go through that for all the people until the day of judgment that are going to experience that. They wouldn't have consolation if it wasn't for her. And they'll know, because when people say those things about you, one of the first thoughts you get is, maybe I'm a bad person. If all the people are saying this, I must be a bad person. So, and she's so awesome. She says, when she tells the story herself, she says, radiallahu ta'ala anha, I didn't think I was worth Quran coming down for me. And she chooses such beautiful words because now she knows she's worth it. Now she knows Allah made her worth it. And so what Allah does is, if the most honored of people can be humiliated like this, who am I? It's okay. Who are you? It'll happen, and Allah will still, Allah is the one who gives the dignity, Allah is the one who restores it. So, وَالْهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ is good for you. That is the lesson that's been reinforced in this surah over and over again. Anyhow, قَالَ سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ صَابِرًا وَلَا أَعْصِي لَكَ أَمْرًا. Again, you'll find, I'm going to be patient, but this time he recognizes, inshallah. I'm going to be patient. Inshallah, you're going to find me to be patient, inshallah. And the wijdan, finding, is another theme that recurs here multiple times. فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِّنْ عِبَادِنَا سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ صَابِرًا. Right? Finding is going to be something that occurs over and over again. And finally, I'll reinforce something I said before. Actually, no, I'll go to something new. The pattern, the structure, one of the structural things about this story, and then inshallah, probably next time, I'll share with you like an ayah by ayah lessons of this story, inshallah. Is فَانْطَلَقَ حَتَّى إِذَا. When you say how are each piece of the story structured, first they come upon something. The first part is they come upon something. Then Khidr alayhi salam does something shocking. Like they came upon the ship, and what did Khidr do? He tore it up, right? Or they came upon the child and he killed him, etc. Then the third part is always Musa alayhi salam questions, why did you do this? How could you do this? And then the fourth part is always Khidr reminds him. Reminds him of what? He doesn't explain what he did. He simply reminds him, didn't I tell you you're not going to be patient? Which means Musa alayhi salam keeps forgetting. And by the way, did he say inshallah? He said inshallah. Just because you say inshallah doesn't mean you'll remember. Right? وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ. Remember your mention when you mention your Rabb when you forget. So he keeps reminding him, and then Musa alayhi salam responds apologetically until at the very end Musa alayhi salam explains his actions. Or rather Khidr alayhi salam explains his actions and says, okay, this is the reason behind this and this and this and this. Interestingly enough, the word dhikr, a play on words. حَتَّى أُحْدِثَ لَكَ مِنْهُ ذِكْرًا. This is the last thing I'll share with you. حَتَّى أُحْدِثَ لَكَ مِنْهُ ذِكْرًا. Until I make mention of anything for you. The word dhikr in Arabic is reminder. It's also mention. And in the beginning of the story, Khidr said, look, you have to follow me and you can't ask me any questions. لا تسألني في شيء حتى أحدث لك منه ذكرًا, until I make some mention of it to you. So the word dhikr in the ayah is used in the meaning of mention. Is that clear? But interestingly thereafter, the mention, because of Musa alayhi salam's nature, because of him not being able to handle what's going on around him, it was never ever anything mentioned. Everything was actually reminder. So the word dhikr, which was supposed to be mentioned, turns into what? Reminder, because that's what Musa alayhi salam needed more. Between nisyan and dhikr. So the duality of both meanings is very nicely captured. Sometimes people just need a mention, other people need a reminder. Some students, in learning, some students you can say something to them and they get it. Other students, please, let me repeat that again. Oh, could you say that again? Yeah, I can say it again. Okay, just one more time. I think I'm getting it. And that's okay. A teacher shouldn't get annoyed. They should just repeat. They should just repeat. They should just repeat. And that's okay. Sometimes for some people, that's how learning works. For other people, you say one time, I got it. You don't have to say it again. You got it. So may Allah Azza wa Jal make us good students, inspired students by the Book of Allah. Hopefully, inshallah, by next time we wrap up the story of Musa and Khidr. These were just some outside notes before we dive into the ayah by ayah. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.